The crystal water glasses clinked as Simone set them carefully on table 12. Her hands were steady, professional, even though her heart had started hammering the moment she saw him walk through the mahogany doors of Heritage Restaurant. Brett. Her ex-husband looked exactly the same as he had 2 years ago during the divorce proceedings. Same smug smile, same expensive suit that he probably couldn't actually afford, same way of walking like he owned every room he entered. But this time there was someone new attached to his arm. A blonde woman in a tight red dress, laughing too loudly at something he'd said. Amber. The paralegal from his law firm. The woman he'd been sleeping with while Simone cooked his dinners and pressed his shirts. Simone kept her head down, focusing on arranging the silverware. Maybe he wouldn't notice her. Maybe they'd be seated in someone else's section. But luck had never been her friend where Brett was concerned. Simone. His voice cut across the elegant dining room, loud and mocking. Simone Patterson? Is that really you? She straightened slowly, pulling her server's apron smooth, and met his eyes. Hello, Brett. Welcome to Heritage. I'll be taking care of your table tonight. Brett's face split into a grin that made her stomach turn. He elbowed Amber, who was staring at Simone with barely concealed satisfaction. Babe, this is my ex-wife. The one I told you about. He turned back to Simone, shaking his head like he was looking at a stray dog. Wow, serving tables now? I guess the judge didn't give you as much as you wanted in the divorce, huh? Several nearby diners glanced over, their conversations faltering. Simone felt heat creep up her neck, but she kept her expression neutral. Professional. Can I start you off with something to drink? She asked, her voice level. Brett leaned back in his chair, enjoying himself. Remember when you used to say you wanted to open a restaurant someday? Guess you made it, just not quite the way you imagined. He laughed, a mean sound that echoed off the exposed brick walls. I mean, you're in a restaurant. You're just on the wrong side of the equation. Amber giggled, touching Brett's arm. Brett, stop. You're terrible. What? I'm just saying it's pretty clear who made the right choices in life. He gestured at his suit, at Amber, at everything he thought made him important. I'm about to make partner at the firm, and she's taking orders from people who are actually successful. Simone wrote down their drink orders, bourbon for him, white wine for her, and turned toward the kitchen. She could feel their eyes on her back, could hear Amber's whispered questions and Brett's loud responses. Yeah, she never really had any ambition. That's why the marriage failed. She wanted to just sit at home all day while I built my career. The kitchen doors swung shut behind Simone, muffling his voice. She stood for a moment in the bright lights and organized chaos of the commercial kitchen, letting the familiar sounds wash over her. Pans clattering, orders being called out, the sizzle of butter in hot steel. Thomas, her restaurant manager, appeared at her elbow. He was a tall man in his 50s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. You okay? I saw who just sat in your section. Simone took a breath and smiled. It was a real smile this time, small but genuine. I'm fine. Just need to get through their dinner service. You want me to have Jessica take over their table? You don't need to deal with him. She shook her head. No. I've got this. Thomas studied her for a moment, then nodded. You're the boss. Those 3 words steadied her. Because he was right. She was the boss. Brett had no idea that the woman serving his overpriced steak was the same woman who signed his paycheck. Well, not his directly, but she employed 43 people in this location alone. She turned this failing restaurant into the hottest reservation in the city. Nicole, the head chef, emerged from the line with 2 perfectly crafted cocktails on a small tray. She was a petite woman with dark skin and creative braids, one of the best culinary talents in the state. She'd won awards. She'd been on cooking shows. And she chose to work here for Simone. Table 12's drinks, Nicole said, then lowered her voice. I heard what he said. Want me to add some extra seasoning to his food? Simone laughed despite herself. Don't you dare. Everything that leaves your kitchen needs to be perfect, just like always. Even for trash humans? Especially for trash humans. When this is all over, I want him to remember that the best meal he's had all year was served to him by the woman he thought was a failure. Nicole grinned. Now that's the kind of revenge I can get behind. Simone carried the drinks back out to table 12. Brett and Amber had moved on to gossiping about other people, barely acknowledging her when she set down their glasses. She took their dinner orders efficiently, professionally, giving them no ammunition for more cruelty. Throughout the evening, she watched them from across the dining room as she served her other tables. Brett ordered the most expensive wine on the list. He was loud, calling attention to himself, trying to impress Amber and anyone else who would listen. He sent his steak back once, claiming it wasn't cooked right, even though Simone knew Nicole had prepared it exactly to his specifications. He wanted to feel important, to exercise power over someone. That someone just happened to own the building he was sitting in. When they finally finished their meal, Brett made a show of leaving a $5 tip on a $200 check. As they walked out, he paused by the host's stand where Simone was reviewing reservations. "Hey," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "No hard feelings about tonight, okay? I just think it's funny how things work out. You take care of yourself, Simone." She looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw what she'd been too close to see during their marriage. He was small. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. His confidence was hollow. His success was built on credit cards and loans and the backs of people he'd stepped on. "You too, Brett," she said quietly. He left with Amber giggling on his arm, and Simone watched the door close behind them. Then she walked back to the kitchen, untied her apron, and hung it on its hook. Thomas was waiting, knowing what she needed without asking. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "Same time tomorrow," she confirmed. Then she smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "This is going to be fun." 2 years ago, Simone's world had shattered in the most ordinary way possible. She'd come home early from her volunteer shift at the community center, arms full of groceries for the dinner she'd planned to make. Brett loved her pot roast. She'd been making it every Thursday for 6 years. The house was supposed to be empty. Brett had told her he was working late on a big case. But his car was in the driveway and there were sounds coming from upstairs. Sounds that made her freeze in the kitchen, bags still in her hands, her mind trying to convince her that she was wrong about what she was hearing. She wasn't wrong. Simone had climbed those stairs slowly, each step feeling like walking through water. The bedroom door was open. They hadn't even bothered to close it all the way. Brett and Amber, tangled together in the bed Simone had picked out, on the sheets she'd washed that morning. The confrontation had been ugly. Brett didn't apologize. He blamed her. She was boring. She never wanted to do anything. She'd let herself go. She didn't understand the pressures of his career. Amber got him in ways Simone never could. Each word had been designed to cut, and they'd done their job. The divorce took 8 months. Brett fought her on everything. He claimed she'd been living off his income for years, contributing nothing to the marriage. He wanted the house, the cars, the savings account. His lawyer painted Simone as a lazy housewife who'd been happy to let her husband support her while she did nothing. What hurt most was that some of it looked true on paper. Simone had left her job at an accounting firm when they got married because Brett wanted a wife who could entertain clients, host parties, manage their home. She'd been good at it. She'd made his career possible. But none of that mattered in court. The judge awarded Brett the house and most of their assets. Simone got a small settlement, enough to rent an apartment and start over. People pitied her. Her friends, their old neighbors, even her own mother looked at her with sadness, wondering how she'd survive. No one knew about the trust fund. Simone's grandmother had passed away 3 months after the wedding. She'd been a fierce, independent woman who'd built her own business in the 1960s when few people thought women could run companies. She'd left Simone $300,000 in a trust that couldn't be touched until Simone turned 35. Simone had turned 35 1 week after the divorce was finalized. She'd never told Brett about the trust. It had been set up long before they met, managed by her grandmother's lawyer, completely separate from their marital assets. Legally, it wasn't part of the divorce settlement. Morally, she felt no guilt about keeping it to herself. During their marriage, while Brett was climbing the corporate ladder and Amber was climbing Brett, Simone had been taking online business courses. She told Brett she was just keeping herself busy, taking some cooking classes and learning about wine. She'd let him think she was becoming a better housewife. Really, she'd been studying restaurant management, accounting, business law, and culinary arts. She'd earned 2 certifications without him ever noticing. Brett never asked what she did with her days. He assumed she watched television and went to lunch with friends. After the divorce, Simone had rented a small studio apartment in the warehouse district downtown. She'd spent her days researching failing businesses, looking for an opportunity. She'd found Heritage 3 months into her search. The restaurant had been called Chez Michel, then, a pretentious French place that was bleeding money. The owner was desperate to sell. The location was perfect, right in the arts district that was starting to revitalize. The bones of the building were good, all exposed brick and high ceilings. It just needed vision. And Simone had vision. She'd bought it for $175,000, leaving her enough capital to renovate and operate for 6 months. She'd changed the name to Heritage, honoring her grandmother's legacy. She'd interviewed dozens of people before finding Thomas and Nicole, two experienced professionals who believed in her plans. But here was the brilliant part, the part that even Thomas and Nicole thought was a little crazy. Simone didn't just want to own a restaurant. She wanted to understand it from the inside out. She wanted to know what her dishwashers dealt with, what her servers experienced, what problems came up that she'd never see from an office. So she'd worked every position. She'd started in the kitchen, doing prep work at 6 in the morning. She'd washed dishes until her hands cracked. She'd bussed tables, hosted, bartended, and eventually moved into serving. She wore the same uniform as everyone else. She followed the same rules. She took the same breaks. To the rest of the staff, she was just Simone, a hard-working single woman who was good at her job. Only Thomas and Nicole knew she owned the place. They called her by her first name in front of staff and saved the title boss for private moments. The restaurant had transformed under her careful attention. She'd studied what worked and what didn't. She'd listened to customer feedback. She'd made changes based on what she learned from being on the floor every night. Heritage became known for its innovative American cuisine with Southern influences, its impeccable service, and its welcoming atmosphere. Within a year, they'd gone from struggling to fill tables to being booked 3 weeks in advance. Within 18 months, they'd turned a profit. Simone had been serving tables the night a food critic from the city's major newspaper came in. She'd taken his order, brought his food, chatted with him about the menu. A week later, Heritage got 4 stars and a glowing review. The critic specifically mentioned the knowledgeable and friendly service. That review had been clipped and framed, hanging in the kitchen where the staff could see it. They didn't know that the server mentioned was their owner. Now, 2 years after the divorce, Simone owned Heritage outright. She had money in the bank. She was looking at purchasing a second location. And she just served her ex-husband dinner while he mocked her for being a failure. The irony was delicious, better than anything on Nicole's menu. Simone sat in her studio apartment that night, still wearing her work clothes, and thought about Brett's face. The contempt. The satisfaction he'd taken in her supposed downfall. Part of her wanted to march back to that restaurant tomorrow and tell him exactly who she was. She wanted to see his face crumble. She wanted him to know that while he'd been congratulating himself on winning the divorce, she'd been building an empire. But that would be too easy. Too quick. Brett had humiliated her in front of a dining room full of people. He'd made assumptions about her worth based on her uniform and her job title. He'd brought his mistress to laugh at her pain. No, Simone thought, finishing her tea and setting the cup in the sink. Brett deserved more than a simple reveal. He deserved to really understand what he'd lost. What he'd thrown away. What he'd never actually had in the first place. She'd spent 2 years building something real. Brett had spent those same 2 years living on borrowed time and borrowed money, trying to maintain an image that was already cracking around the edges. Simone smiled in the darkness of her apartment. She'd learned patience in the restaurant business. She'd learned timing. She'd learned that the best dishes were the ones you couldn't rush. Revenge was the same way. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of Heritage's dining room as Simone walked through her restaurant at 6 a.m. This was her favorite time before the staff arrived, when the space was quiet and full of possibility. The tables were set from the night before, ready for lunch service. The brass fixtures gleamed. Everything was exactly as it should be. She moved through the dining room, checking details with the same careful attention she brought to serving. A water spot on a wine glass. A chair slightly out of alignment. These small things mattered. They always mattered. In the kitchen, she started the coffee and pulled out her laptop. This was when she did her real work, the business side that no one else saw. Spreadsheets opened on her screen. Numbers told stories if you knew how to read them. Food costs, labor percentages, profit margins. Heritage was doing better than she'd projected. Last month they'd cleared $42,000 in profit. This month looked even stronger. The back door opened and Thomas arrived, carrying his worn leather messenger bag. He was always the first to arrive after Simone. He poured himself coffee and sat across from her at the steel prep table. "Morning, boss." "Morning." She turned the laptop so he could see the numbers. "We're up 8% from last month." Thomas whistled low. That critic review is still paying dividends. Plus word of mouth has been incredible. He paused, studying her face. "How are you doing after last night?" "I'm fine. Actually better than fine." She closed the laptop. "Brett showing up like that, saying those things, it reminded me why I'm doing this. Which is? To prove that the only person who ever doubted me was him." She smiled. "Well, him and myself sometimes. But I'm working on that." Nicole burst through the door, energetic despite the early hour. She had her knives in a roll bag and a takeout cup of coffee from the place down the street. I've been thinking about the fall menu. What if we did a play on chicken and dumplings but elevated? I'm thinking herb-roasted chicken breast, ricotta gnocchi, and a wild mushroom broth. This was how their mornings went. Thomas handled front-of-house operations and customer service. Nicole ran the kitchen like a general commanding troops. And Simone oversaw it all while simultaneously working as a server, learning her business from every angle. I love it, Simone said. Let's test it this week and see what the staff thinks. The rest of the team started trickling in over the next hour. Jessica and Marcus came in together, laughing about something. They were both college students working their way through school. Roberto arrived with his quiet competence. Heading straight for the dish station, he ran with military precision. Claire, the other full-time server, was next, followed by Ben the bartender. They all called Simone by her first name. They worked alongside her as equals. She'd served at their weddings and baby showers. She knew their families. She covered their shifts when they were sick. To them, she was a co-worker who'd been there from the beginning, someone who understood the job because she did it every day. At the pre-shift meeting, Thomas went over the reservations. They were fully booked for lunch and dinner with a waiting list for both services. Claire gave Simone a friendly nudge. Hey, I heard you had to serve your ex last night. That must have been rough. Word traveled fast in a restaurant. Of course everyone knew by now. It was fine, Simone said. Just another table. Brett's such a jerk, Jessica said, shaking her head. He was so rude. I heard him from across the room. I wanted to spill wine on him. Please don't spill wine on the customers, Thomas said, but he was smiling. Even the jerks. Especially the jerks, Simone added. Their tips aren't worth the dry cleaning. Everyone laughed and the tension broke. They moved into their opening tasks, each person knowing their role. Simone fell into the rhythm of work, the comfortable pattern of preparation that made service possible. At 10 a.m. her phone buzzed. It was her lawyer, Patricia, returning her call from yesterday. Simone, what can I do for you? Simone stepped into the office, closing the door. I need you to look into something for me. My ex-husband, Brett Patterson. I want to know about his financial situation. His law practice. Anything public record. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Is this about the restaurant? Did he cause problems? No, nothing like that. I just want to know where he stands. Simone paused. And I want to make sure all my assets are protected. He doesn't know I own Heritage or any of my other investments. I want to keep it that way. He can't touch any of it. Your grandmother's trust was completely separate from your marital assets, and everything you've built since the divorce is yours alone. Patricia's voice warmed with approval. But I'll do the research. Give me a few days. Thank you. Lunch service was busy and smooth. Simone moved between tables with practiced ease, reading customers, anticipating needs. She loved this part. The connection with people, the small moments of making someone's day better. A business lunch that went well because she remembered how they liked their coffee. An anniversary couple who left glowing because she'd noticed the occasion and brought them a complimentary dessert. Between lunch and dinner, during the slow afternoon hours, Simone sat with Nicole to taste the new dish. The chicken was perfect, the gnocchi light and flavorful, the broth rich without being heavy. They made notes on adjustments, talking through how to present it, what it should cost. This menu is going to put us on the map even more, Nicole said. People are going to come from across the state for this food. They already are, Thomas said, joining them with his tablet. I just got a call from someone wanting to book a private event next month. 50 people. Corporate dinner. They heard about us from someone who ate here last week. Simone felt that familiar surge of pride and satisfaction. This was real. This was hers. She'd built it with her own hands, her own decisions, her own risk. That evening, during the dinner rush, Brett called the restaurant. Simone was on the floor when Thomas caught her attention and gestured to the phone. He wants to make a reservation for Saturday night, Thomas said quietly. Should I tell him we're booked? Simone thought for a moment. No. Give him a table. 7 p.m. Thomas raised an eyebrow but nodded. You're the boss. After service ended and the restaurant was clean, the closing staff gone home, Simone sat at the bar while Ben finished his inventory. He was a grad student studying psychology and he had a gift for reading people. You're plotting something, he said, not looking up from his clipboard. What makes you say that? Because you have the same look my sister gets when she's about to do something brilliant and slightly terrifying. He glanced at her. It's about that guy last night, isn't it? The ex. He's coming back Saturday. And you're going to tell him who you really are? Simone swirled the water in her glass. Not yet. First, I want to understand exactly where he stands. What his life actually looks like beyond the expensive suit and the fake confidence. Ben grinned. I knew I liked you for a reason. You're patient. That's the mark of a true predator. I'm not a predator. No, he agreed. You're something better. You're someone who knows how to wait for the exact right moment. He finished his count and closed his notebook. Just promise me I get to watch when that moment comes. Deal. Simone locked up the restaurant at midnight and walked to her car in the lot behind the building. The city was quiet, the arts district peaceful except for a few late-night bars still open down the street. She sat in her car for a moment before starting the engine, looking back at Heritage. The sign glowed in the darkness, elegant and inviting. Inside those walls she'd created something real and lasting. She employed people, paid fair wages, offered health insurance and retirement plans. She'd turned a failing restaurant into a destination. She'd done it without Brett's help, without his knowledge, without his approval. And soon he was going to understand exactly what he'd lost. Patricia called 3 days later with information that made Simone sit down at her tiny kitchen table and listen carefully. Your ex-husband is in financial trouble, Patricia said. Serious trouble. His law practice is barely staying afloat. He's got 3 maxed-out credit cards, 2 car loans on vehicles he can't afford, and a mortgage on a house that's underwater. He owes money to several colleagues. There's even a tax lien from 2 years ago that he's still paying off in installments. Simone stared at her coffee cup, processing this information. But he acts like everything is perfect. That's the thing about debt. It's easy to hide if you're willing to keep borrowing. Patricia's voice was matter-of-fact. He's got about 6 months before it all comes crashing down, maybe less. His firm is considering letting him go. There have been complaints about his work quality. He missed a filing deadline last month that cost a client their case. What about Amber? The girlfriend? She doesn't know. From what I can tell, she thinks he's successful. He takes her to expensive restaurants, buys her gifts, takes vacations. All on credit. Patricia paused. Simone, why do you want to know this? Because knowledge is power, Simone said simply. And I want to understand the full picture before I make any decisions. After they hung up, Simone sat in her apartment for a long time. She thought about the man who'd mocked her in front of a dining room full of people. The man who'd told her she was worthless, who'd fought to take everything from her in the divorce, who'd blamed her for his own infidelity. That man was broke and pretending to be rich. That man was failing and pretending to succeed. That man had thrown away a woman who would have supported him through anything, and replaced her with someone who only wanted the illusion of success he was desperately trying to maintain. There was a certain poetry to it. Saturday came. Simone worked the day shift, then went home to shower and change. She came back for the evening service in her usual uniform. Black pants, crisp white shirt, comfortable shoes. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. She wore minimal makeup and small silver earrings. She looked exactly like what she was pretending to be, a server working for tips. Brett arrived at 7 p.m. sharp, Amber on his arm again. This time she was wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people made in a week. Brett had on a different expensive suit, this one charcoal gray with a red tie. They were seated at table 8 in the middle of the dining room where everyone could see them. Thomas raised an eyebrow at Simone, silently asking if she was sure about this. She nodded. Good evening, she said, approaching their table with menus. Welcome back to Heritage. Brett looked up, and his expression shifted from surprise to amusement. Oh, you again. Still serving tables, I see. Didn't get promoted to hostess yet? Amber giggled, but it sounded forced. She was looking at Simone with something that might have been pity or might have been embarrassment. Can I start you with drinks? Simone asked, ignoring his comment. Bourbon neat. Top shelf. Brett leaned back in his chair. And the lady will have champagne. The real stuff, not that cheap sparkling wine. Simone wrote it down. Of course. I'll be right back. In the kitchen, Nicole was plating dishes with her usual precision. How's it going out there? He's being himself, Simone said. Which means he's being terrible. Want me to mess with his food? You know I don't want that. I know. But the offer stands. Nicole handed her 2 beautiful cocktails on a tray. Bourbon and champagne, both top shelf. Because we don't serve cheap anything here, despite what he might think. Simone carried the drinks back out. Throughout the evening, she served Brett and Amber with perfect professionalism while watching them interact. Brett dominated the conversation, talking about his cases, his victories, his importance. Amber listened with the expression of someone who'd heard these stories before but knew better than to look bored. He ordered expensive wine. He sent his appetizer back, claiming it was too cold even though Simone knew it had been plated seconds before she brought it out. He snapped his fingers to get her attention when he wanted something. Every action was designed to make himself feel important by making someone else feel small. But Simone wasn't small anymore. She was the owner of the establishment he was trying to impress his girlfriend in. She was the one who'd approved the menu he was eating from. She was the reason this restaurant existed at all. And soon she'd make sure he knew it. Between courses, Simone chatted briefly with other tables. A regular couple who came in every week for date night. A business dinner that was celebrating a successful deal. A family marking a graduation. These people treated her with respect, even kindness. They asked about her day, remembered her name from previous visits, tipped well because they valued good service. The contrast with Brett's table was stark. Near the end of the meal, when Brett was showing off by ordering the most expensive dessert wine on the menu, something interesting happened. A man at table 4 recognized Simone and called her over. His name was Gerald Morrison, and he was a commercial real estate developer who'd been courting her for weeks about a property he thought would be perfect for a second restaurant location. They'd had coffee twice to discuss it. He knew exactly who she was. "Miss Patterson," he said warmly. "I didn't expect to see you on the floor tonight. Taking a hands-on approach as always." Simone felt her heart skip. She'd been careful about keeping her identity quiet in the dining room. Gerald clearly didn't know she was working undercover. "Just helping out during a busy night," she said smoothly. "How's your meal?" "Excellent as always. Listen, I wanted to follow up on our conversation about the property on Oak Street. I think we should move forward. Your vision for that space is exactly what the neighborhood needs." Simone was aware of Brett at the next table, close enough to hear every word. "Let's schedule a meeting next week to discuss details." "Perfect. I'll have my assistant call you Monday." Gerald smiled. "By the way, I've been bringing all my business clients here. Heritage has become my go-to place for important dinners. You've really created something special." After Gerald's table left, Simone felt Amber's eyes on her. The blonde woman was watching her with a puzzled expression, like she was trying to solve a problem she hadn't known existed. Simone cleared Brett and Amber's dessert plates and brought their check. Brett made a show of pulling out a credit card. "Keep the change," he said, even though he'd left another insulting $5 tip on a $300 bill. As they stood to leave, Amber paused. "That man called you Miss Patterson. Are you related to the owner or something?" Simone smiled. "Something like that." She watched them leave, Brett oblivious, Amber looking back over her shoulder with confusion on her face. Thomas appeared at her elbow. "That was interesting." "Yes, it was. You're playing a long game here. The best games are the ones worth playing." That night, after the restaurant closed, Simone sat in her small office in the back of the building. This was where she did her real work, surrounded by filing cabinets and framed photos and the business licenses that bore her name as sole proprietor. She pulled up her business plan for the second location. The property on Oak Street was perfect. Bigger than Heritage, in a neighborhood that was gentrifying but not yet overdeveloped. She could create something even better there, building on everything she'd learned here. She had the capital. She had the experience. She had the team to help her expand. Brett thought she was a failure serving tables to survive. The truth was so much bigger than he could imagine. And soon, very soon, she'd make sure he understood exactly how wrong he'd been about everything. Amber came back alone on Tuesday for lunch. Simone was hosting when she walked in, looking nervous and out of place in her business casual clothes. She asked for a table for one, and Simone seated her in Jessica's section near the window. But after 20 minutes, Amber flagged Simone down. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course. Is everything okay with your meal?" "The food is great. It's just..." Amber looked around the busy dining room. "That man the other night, Gerald Morrison. He called you Miss Patterson. He talked like you were important here. And I've been thinking about it, and some things aren't adding up." Simone sat down across from her. This was interesting. Amber was smarter than Brett gave her credit for. "What things?" "The way the staff treats you. The way that manager defers to you. The way you move through this restaurant like you own it." Amber's eyes were sharp. "Do you own it?" There it was. The question that would change everything. Simone could have lied. She could have deflected. But looking at Amber, she saw something familiar in her expression. The dawning realization that she'd been lied to. That things weren't what they seemed. That the man she trusted might not be trustworthy at all. "Yes," Simone said simply. "I own Heritage. I've owned it for 2 years. Amber sat back like she'd been pushed. But Brett said you were broke after the divorce. He said you got almost nothing. He said you were working as a server because you had no other options. I am working as a server. Because I choose to. Because I want to understand my business from every angle. Simone kept her voice level. Brett knows nothing about my financial situation. My inheritance came after our divorce was finalized. Everything I built on my own. Oh my God. Amber's face had gone pale. He has no idea, does he? No. And you've been serving him. Letting him mock you. Letting him think you're struggling. Amber's voice rose slightly. Why? Because I wanted to see who he really is when he thinks he has power over someone. Simone leaned forward. And I wanted to understand what kind of man you're with before I reveal the truth. Amber looked down at her hands. Her expensive manicure, her designer purse on the table, her carefully applied makeup. He's broke, isn't he? So she'd figured that out too. Amber was definitely smarter than Brett realized. I don't know the details of his finances, Simone said carefully. But I know expensive wine when I see it, and I know what it looks like when someone is spending beyond their means. He keeps buying me things. Taking me places. But his credit cards get declined sometimes and he always has an excuse. Bank error. Fraud prevention. Identity theft protection. Amber laughed bitterly. I believed him because I wanted to. Because he seemed so confident and successful. The same way he seemed confident and successful when he was married to me while sleeping with you? That landed hard. Amber flinched. I'm not proud of that. I thought he was going to leave you. He said you didn't understand him. He said the marriage was already over. It wasn't over until I found you in my bed. Silence stretched between them. The lunch crowd buzzed around them, but their table felt isolated in its own bubble of uncomfortable truth. I'm sorry, Amber said finally. I know that doesn't change anything, but I am sorry. I was selfish and wrong, and I told myself stories to make it okay. Simone studied her. Amber was young, maybe 28 or 29. She'd been dazzled by an older man with a fancy title and nice suits. She'd believed the lies because they were prettier than the truth. What are you going to do? Simone asked. I don't know. Amber picked at her salad, not eating. Part of me wants to confront him. But another part of me wants to see how long he'll keep lying. And what happens when the lies catch up with him? They always do, don't they? Amber looked up and her eyes were wet. I left my job at the law firm to work for a nonprofit. Less money, but I thought it didn't matter because Brett was successful. Now I'm realizing he was never successful. He was just good at pretending. What will you do when he finds out I own this place? Amber was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I'll probably break up with him. Not because of the money. Because of the lying. Because if he lied about you, about your situation, about his finances, what else has he lied about? That's very wise. Is it? Amber smiled sadly. Because the wise thing would have been not dating a married man in the first place. They sat together for a few more minutes, two women who'd both been hurt by the same man in different ways. Then Amber paid her check, left a generous tip, and stood to go. For what it's worth, she said, this restaurant is beautiful. You've built something real. Something that matters. Thank you. And Simone? I hope when you reveal this to Brett, I'm there to see his face. After Amber left, Simone stood at the host's stand thinking. She'd expected anger from Amber, maybe defensiveness. She hadn't expected introspection or apology. People were complicated. They made mistakes and bad choices, and sometimes, if they were brave enough, they owned those choices. That evening during dinner service, Simone got a call from Patricia. I have more information, her lawyer said. Brett's firm is letting him go. They're calling it a mutual decision, but from what my contacts say, he was asked to resign. Too many complaints, too many mistakes. His last day is in 2 weeks. Simone thanked her and hung up. The pieces were falling into place faster than she'd anticipated. Brett's carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and he had no idea that the woman he'd mocked was watching it all happen. She thought about Amber's question. Why was she doing this? Why not just confront Brett and move on with her life? Because some lessons could only be learned through experience. Because Brett needed to understand not just that he'd been wrong, but why he'd been wrong. He'd spent 2 years thinking he'd won. Thinking he'd traded up. Thinking he'd escaped a worthless wife for something better. He needed to understand that he'd actually thrown away someone real for an illusion. That his cruelty had been based on false assumptions. That the woman he'd dismissed was stronger and more successful than he'd ever been. And maybe, just maybe, he needed to understand that his own downfall had nothing to do with Simone and everything to do with his own choices. That night, Simone wrote out a timeline in her notebook. Brett's last day at the firm would be in 2 weeks. Her meeting about the second location was scheduled for the week after that. The food critic from the national magazine was coming in 3 weeks. Everything was aligning. She just needed to choose the perfect moment. The perfect moment came sooner than Simone expected. It was a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after Amber's lunch visit. The restaurant was fully booked, every table filled with the pleasant hum of conversation and the clink of silverware on china. Simone was serving a four-top near the kitchen when Thomas caught her eye and gestured toward the entrance. Brett stood at the host's stand alone, looking disheveled. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his hair not quite styled the way he usually kept it. He looked like a man who'd just had the worst day of his life. "I need to talk to Simone," he was saying to Claire, who'd been hosting that night. The server. "Tell her Brett needs to speak with her." Claire looked uncomfortable, glancing toward Simone for guidance. Simone finished pouring water for her table and walked over. "Brett, we're fully booked tonight. If you need a table, you'll have to make a reservation." "I don't want a table." His voice was too loud, drawing attention from nearby diners. "I need to talk to you. In private. I'm working. Please." Something in his voice made her pause. It wasn't his usual arrogance. It sounded like desperation. "Just 5 minutes." Simone glanced at Thomas, who was watching from across the room. He nodded slightly, indicating he'd cover her tables. She led Brett through the dining room, past the kitchen, to her small office in the back. It was a modest space. A desk, a filing cabinet, a computer, a wall covered with framed documents and photos. Brett looked around like he was seeing a museum exhibit, his eyes catching on details. The business license with her name on it. The articles about Heritage's success. The photo of her and her grandmother, both smiling. "You own this place," he said flatly. "Yes." "How long?" 2 years. "I bought it 3 months after our divorce was finalized." Brett sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk. He looked older than he had 2 weeks ago, like he'd aged years and days. "Amber told me. She came to my office today. Told me she'd talked to you, that you'd admitted it. I didn't believe her. I thought she was lying, trying to make me feel bad for how I treated you. You should feel bad for how you treated me. So I came here to prove her wrong. But the host called you Miss Patterson. And that manager treats you like you're in charge. And your name is on the business license on your wall." He laughed, a broken sound. "You've been serving me. Watching me mock you. Knowing the whole time that you owned the place." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I wanted to see who you really are." "And what did you see?" Simone sat behind her desk, the barrier of wood and professionalism between them. "I saw a man who measures his worth by making others feel small. A man who equates service work with failure. A man who judges people based on their job title instead of their character." Brett rubbed his face. "Amber broke up with me. She said I'm a liar. That I lied about you, about my finances, about everything." "Did you lie?" "I told her things were fine. I told her we'd be okay. I didn't tell her about the firm letting me go or the debt or the fact that I'm about to lose everything." He looked up at her. "But I didn't lie about you. I really thought you were struggling. I thought the divorce had broken you. I thought I'd won. You thought wrong. Obviously." He gestured around the office. "You're successful. You own a restaurant. You're probably making more money than I ever did. And I've been treating you like you were pathetic." "You have." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside the office, Simone could hear the kitchen staff calling orders, the normal controlled chaos of dinner service. Her world, running perfectly without her in it because she'd built strong systems and hired good people. "I came here to ask you for help," Brett said finally. "No. You don't even know what I was going to ask." "I don't need to." "The answer is no." Brett's face flushed. "Just like that?" "I'm drowning here, Simone. The firm fired me. I've got debts I can't pay. I'm going to lose the house. I thought maybe, since you're doing so well, you could loan me some money. Or give me a job. I could manage the restaurant or work in the kitchen or something." Simone felt a flash of anger, hot and bright. "You stood in my dining room and mocked me for serving people. You told your girlfriend that I was a failure. You spent 2 years thinking you'd escaped something worthless. And now you want me to save you? I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry for how I treated you during the divorce. I'm sorry for cheating. I'm sorry for everything." His voice rose. "But I'm desperate. I need help. And you're the only person I know who has money. That's not my problem." You were my wife. I was your wife. Past tense. You ended that marriage when you brought another woman into our bed. Simone stood up. You got what you wanted in the divorce. You got the house and the cars and everything you claimed you'd earned. You told the judge I contributed nothing to our marriage. So now you have to live with the consequences of that choice. But you have money now. You have this restaurant and probably more. You can afford to help me. I can afford a lot of things, Brett. That doesn't mean I should spend my money fixing your mistakes. She walked to the door and opened it. You need to leave. Simone, please. Leave. If you don't, I'll have security escort you out. Brett stood slowly, his face red with humiliation and anger. This is revenge, isn't it? You're getting back at me for the divorce. No. This is consequence. There's a difference. What difference? Revenge would be me trying to hurt you. Consequence is you experiencing the natural results of your own actions. Simone met his eyes. You cheated on me. You lied about my contributions to our marriage. You mocked me in public. You treated service workers like they were beneath you. None of that was my fault. All of it was your choice. So you're just going to let me fail? You're going to fail whether I help you or not. Because the problem isn't money, Brett. The problem is you. The way you treat people. The way you value image over substance. The way you blame everyone else for your mistakes. She held the door open wider. Money won't fix that. Brett walked toward the door, then stopped in the doorway. I really did love you once, you know. Maybe. But you didn't respect me. And without respect, love doesn't mean much. He left without another word. Simone stood in her office doorway watching him walk through her kitchen, past her staff, out the back door into the night. She felt Thomas come up beside her. You okay? I'm fine. That looked intense. He wanted me to save him from his own choices. Thomas nodded slowly. And you said no. I said no. Good. He doesn't deserve your help. He never did. Simone returned to the dining room, to her tables and her customers and her work. The rest of the night passed in its normal rhythm. She served food, cleared plates, chatted with guests, did her job with the same care and attention she always brought to it. Near the end of service, a young couple asked her to take a picture of them. It was their anniversary and they'd specifically come to Heritage because they'd heard it was special. Simone took several photos with their phone, making sure she got good angles, good lighting. Thank you so much, the woman said. The service here is amazing. You really care about your work. I do, Simone said. This restaurant means everything to me. After they left, after all the tables were cleared and the dining room was empty, Simone sat at the bar while Ben closed down. She thought about Brett's question. Why had she done this? Why had she let him mock her instead of immediately revealing the truth? The answer came to her clearly, because she'd needed to prove it to herself, not to him. She'd needed to work every job in her restaurant. She'd needed to understand her business from the ground up. She'd needed to know that she could succeed not because of her name on the door, but because of her work, her choices, her dedication. Brett showing up and mocking her had been a test she hadn't asked for. But she'd passed it. She'd kept her composure. She'd served him perfectly. She'd proven that she knew how to do the work, not just manage it from a distance. You're smiling, Ben observed. Am I? Yeah. Like you just figured something out. I think I did. Simone finished her water. I think I just realized that I don't need revenge because I've already won. What about your ex? What about him? He's not my responsibility anymore. He never really was. Ben grinned. That's very zen of you. Or maybe I'm just tired of carrying other people's mistakes. She drove home that night with the windows down, cool evening air rushing through her car. The city lights spread out before her, full of possibility and promise. She thought about the second location, about growing her business, about the life she was building. Brett had lost his job, his girlfriend, his house, his reputation. But none of that was Simone's doing. Those were natural consequences of his own choices. His lies. His cruelty. His inability to value the people in his life until they were gone. She'd offered him nothing because she owed him nothing. And that felt like freedom. Word spread fast in their old social circle. Simone heard about it first from her friend Rachel, who'd stayed in touch after the divorce despite being friends with both of them. Rachel called on a Saturday morning, her voice breathless with gossip and vindication. Have you heard what people are saying about Brett? Simone was at the farmer's market, picking out fresh produce for Heritage's menu. She shifted her phone to her other ear and examined a box of beautiful heirloom tomatoes. I've been busy. What are they saying? Everything. About how he lost his job. About Amber breaking up with him. About him showing up at your restaurant begging for money. Rachel paused. Is it true? Do you really own Heritage? I do. Oh my God, Simone. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because it wasn't anyone's business. I was building something and I wanted to do it without commentary or judgment. But everyone felt so sorry for you after the divorce. We all thought you were struggling. I know. And that was fine. I didn't need anyone's pity or help. I just needed time and space to build my life. Rachel was quiet for a moment. People are talking about how he treated you. Janet saw him at Heritage that night when he mocked you in front of everyone. She told everyone in our book club. They're all saying he's a terrible person. He's not terrible. He's human. Humans make mistakes. You're being awfully generous about someone who cheated on you and tried to destroy you in divorce court. Simone paid for her tomatoes and moved to the next stall. I'm not being generous. I'm just being honest. Brett made choices that hurt me, yes. But I don't need to spend the rest of my life punishing him for those choices. I'm too busy building something better. After they hung up, Simone thought about what Rachel had said. People were talking. That was inevitable. Small cities were like small towns in some ways. Everyone knew everyone and gossip spread like wildfire. But the interesting thing was what they were saying. They weren't criticizing Simone for hiding her success. They were criticizing Brett for his behavior, for his cruelty, for his assumptions, for his failure to see value in the woman he'd married. That felt like a kind of justice she hadn't sought but didn't mind receiving. At Heritage that week, business boomed even more than usual. Simone suspected some people were coming just to see her, to verify the story they'd heard. She served them all with the same professionalism, neither confirming nor denying anything. But on Wednesday afternoon, Brett's mother called. Helen Patterson was a kind woman who'd always treated Simone well during the marriage. She'd been horrified by the divorce and had told Simone privately that she was ashamed of her son's behavior. They'd kept in touch sporadically, holiday cards and occasional coffee dates. Simone dear, I heard about what happened at your restaurant. With Brett. Yes. I'm so sorry. He had no right to ask you for help, not after how he treated you. Helen's voice was thick with emotion. I raised him better than that. I don't know what happened to the boy I knew. He made choices, Helen. We all do. But his choices have been so hurtful. To you, to Amber, to himself. She paused. I wanted you to know that I think what you've built is wonderful. That restaurant is beautiful and you should be proud. Thank you. That means a lot. And I wanted to apologize for my son. He won't do it properly, so I'm doing it for him. You deserve better than what he gave you. After the call ended, Simone felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Helen wasn't responsible for Brett's actions any more than Simone was. But the apology mattered anyway, an acknowledgement that what had happened was wrong. That evening, during dinner service, Simone was serving a table near the window when she noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Brett's Audi, the one he couldn't really afford. He was sitting in the driver's seat just watching the restaurant. Thomas noticed too. Want me to call the police? No. He's not doing anything illegal. It's creepy. It's sad. Brett sat there for 2 hours watching people come and go from Heritage. Watching Simone work. When service ended and the last customers left, he finally drove away. He came back the next night. And the night after that. On Friday, Simone walked out to his car and knocked on the window. He rolled it down, looking embarrassed and defiant all at once. What are you doing, Brett? Watching. Watching what? You. This place. Trying to understand how I got everything so wrong. He looked up at her. You're happy. I can see it. You smile at customers. You laugh with your coworkers. You love this work. I do. I never saw you smile like that when you were with me. That's because I wasn't happy with you. I know that now. He rubbed his face. The house is going into foreclosure. I've got creditors calling every day. I'm moving back in with my mother next week. And every time I think about how bad things are, I remember you serving my table and I realize I did this to myself. Yes, you did. Do you hate me? Simone thought about it. Did she hate him? She'd hated him during the divorce. She'd hated him when she found him with Amber. She'd hated him when he tried to take everything from her in court. But now. No, she said honestly. I don't hate you. I don't think about you enough to hate you. That seemed to hurt him more than anger would have. I'm nothing to you. You're my ex-husband. You're someone I used to know. But you're not part of my life anymore, Brett. You haven't been for 2 years. Because I destroyed what we had. You did. And now you get to live with that. She stepped back from his car. Stop coming here. Stop watching my restaurant. Move on with your life. Figure out who you want to be and start working toward that. But leave me out of it. What if I can't? Then that's your problem, not mine. She walked back into the restaurant without looking back. Through the window, she watched him drive away slowly, his taillights disappearing into traffic. Inside, the staff was cleaning up, getting ready to close. Music played softly from the kitchen. Someone laughed. The whole place smelled like Nicole's cooking, warm and inviting. This was Simone's world now. These people, this space, this work. She'd built it from nothing. She'd made it real through her own effort and vision and determination. Brett had no place in this world. He'd had his chance and thrown it away. Now he was dealing with the consequences while she was living her dreams. That wasn't revenge. That was just life. The National Food Magazine article came out 3 weeks later. Simone hadn't told anyone about the interview except Thomas and Nicole. The journalist had spent an entire day at Heritage, watching service, talking to staff, eating multiple dishes from the menu. She'd asked Simone about her journey, her vision, her plans for the future. The article was titled Hidden Gems: 5 Restaurants You Need to Visit Now. Heritage was featured first, with a full-page spread showing the dining room, the kitchen, and a photo of Simone in her server uniform, smiling while taking an order. The write-up was glowing. It talked about her hands-on management style, her commitment to understanding every aspect of the business, her innovative approach to Southern cuisine. It mentioned her plans to open a second location and her scholarship fund for culinary students. But the part that resonated most with readers was the journalist's observation. In an industry where owners often distance themselves from the daily grind, Patterson embodies a different philosophy. She serves tables alongside her staff, not out of necessity, but out of a deep commitment to excellence at every level. This isn't performative leadership. This is genuine understanding of the work that makes great restaurants possible. The article went viral online. Food blogs picked it up. Social media exploded with praise. Heritage's phone didn't stop ringing for 3 days straight. And with the attention came opportunities. A local business channel wanted to interview Simone for a segment about successful women entrepreneurs. A cooking show reached out about featuring Nicole in the restaurant. 3 different investors expressed interest in partnering for the second location. Most importantly, people who'd known Simone before, old colleagues, distant relatives, former neighbors, started reaching out to congratulate her. The narrative had shifted completely. She wasn't the poor ex-wife anymore. She was the successful entrepreneur who'd been quietly building an empire. On a Tuesday morning, Simone met with Gerald Morrison and his team to finalize the deal for the Oak Street property. The building was perfect. 2 stories, exposed brick, original hardwood floors, right in the heart of a neighborhood that was blossoming with art galleries and boutique shops. "I'm thinking we call this one Legacy," Simone told Thomas and Nicole over coffee after the meeting. "Heritage honors my grandmother. Legacy honors what we're building together." "I like it," Nicole said. "Same concept as Heritage? Upscale Southern cuisine? Similar but different. I want Legacy to have its own identity. Maybe we focus on breakfast and brunch in addition to dinner. That neighborhood is full of young professionals who'd love a quality morning spot." Thomas made notes on his tablet. "We'll need to hire a new management team. Some of our servers might want to move up to supervisor roles. I want to promote from within as much as possible. The people who helped build Heritage should have first chance at Legacy." Over the next few weeks, Simone threw herself into the new project. She hired contractors, approved designs, worked with architects. She interviewed potential staff members, looking for people who shared her values and vision. But she didn't abandon Heritage. 3 days a week, she still worked as a server, keeping herself grounded in the reality of the business. The other days were spent on expansion, planning, building. She also started the scholarship fund she'd mentioned in the magazine article. 2 full scholarships to culinary school, awarded annually to students from low-income backgrounds who showed passion and potential. The first recipients were announced in a small ceremony at Heritage, both of them crying as Simone handed them their award letters. "You're changing lives," Thomas told her afterward. "I'm giving people the chance I got. That's all. That's everything." One evening in late October, Simone was serving the dinner rush when she noticed a man sitting alone at the bar, watching her work. He was handsome in a quiet way, with dark eyes and an easy smile. When she went to refill his water, he spoke. "You're Simone Patterson." "I am." "I'm Julian Brooks. I'm the architect working on your Legacy project." She recognized the name. They'd spoken on the phone several times, exchanged dozens of emails, but never met in person. "Julian. It's good to finally meet you. Likewise. I wanted to see Heritage in action before our meeting tomorrow. Understand the aesthetic you're going for. He gestured around the dining room. This place is special. I can see why you want to replicate the feeling. They talked for a few minutes between her tables. He asked intelligent questions about the space, about what worked and what she'd change. He understood the balance between form and function, beauty and utility. I noticed you're serving tonight, he said. The article mentioned that you do that regularly. Is it really necessary? You could just manage from an office. I could. But then I'd lose touch with what matters. Serving keeps me honest. She refilled his water glass. It reminds me that every decision I make affects real people doing real work. It's easy to forget that from behind a desk. Julian smiled. That's a good answer. It's an honest answer. Over the next few weeks, as they worked together on Legacy's design, Simone and Julian developed an easy friendship. He was professional but warm, creative but practical. He listened to her ideas and added his own expertise, creating something better than either of them could have managed alone. He never asked about her personal life or her past. He treated her like a professional equal, respecting her vision and her boundaries. It was refreshing after years of Brett's condescension and control. One afternoon, while they were reviewing floor plans at a coffee shop, Julian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled. Sorry, my daughter. She wants to know if I'm bringing dinner home. You have a daughter? 2 actually. Mia is 8 and Sophie is 6. They live with my ex-wife most of the time, but I get them every other week. He showed her a photo on his phone. 2 beautiful girls with their father's dark eyes and bright smiles. They're lovely. They're everything. He pocketed his phone. The divorce was hard on them, but we're making it work. Co-parenting isn't easy, but we're committed to putting them first. Simone felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Not jealousy exactly. Maybe recognition. Julian had gone through something similar to her experience, but he'd emerged from it with grace and maturity. He focused on what mattered. His kids, his work, his integrity. That's admirable, she said. It's just being a decent person. Which should be the baseline, but apparently isn't. He returned to the floor plans. Anyway, I think if we move the kitchen to the back corner, we can create a better flow for the servers. They worked for another hour, professional and focused. But as Simone drove back to Heritage afterward, she thought about Julian's easy smile and his commitment to his daughters and the way he treated everyone with respect. She wasn't looking for romance. She was too busy building her empire. But it was nice to be reminded that good men existed. Men who valued partnership over dominance. Men who saw work as noble regardless of title. Men who understood that character mattered more than image. Maybe someday when Legacy was open and running smoothly, when she had time to breathe and think about something other than business, maybe then she'd be ready for something more. But for now she had enough. Her restaurants, her staff, her success, her freedom. It was more than enough. Brett showed up at Legacy's construction site on a cold November morning. Simone was there with Julian, reviewing progress with the contractors. They'd just finished discussing the kitchen layout when she saw him standing by the chain-link fence, hands in his pockets, looking smaller somehow than she remembered. I'll be right back, she told Julian, walking over to where Brett stood. You're opening another one, he said without greeting. It wasn't a question. Yes. This is bigger than Heritage. It is. He looked at the building, at the workers moving in and out, at the sign being installed that would eventually read Legacy. You're really doing it? Building an empire. I'm building a business. 2 businesses. Maybe more someday. Meanwhile, I'm living in my mother's basement. He laughed bitterly. She makes me do chores. At 42 years old, I have a curfew. Simone didn't know what to say to that. She felt sympathy, but it was distant, like feeling sorry for a character in a book. His problems weren't hers to fix. What do you want, Brett? I wanted to say I'm sorry. Really sorry. Not just for asking you for money, but for everything. The cheating. The divorce. The way I treated you. He met her eyes. I told myself a lot of stories about why our marriage failed. I blamed you for not being ambitious enough, not being interesting enough, not being enough. But the truth is you were always enough. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy trying to prove something to everyone else. Okay. Okay? That's all you have to say. What do you want me to say? That I forgive you? That we can be friends? That everything is fine now? Simone shook her head. I appreciate the apology, Brett. Genuinely. But it doesn't change anything. You can't apologize your way out of consequences. I know. I just wanted you to hear it. I wanted you to know that I understand now. I see what I lost. I see what I threw away. He gestured at the construction site. And I see what you built without me. I built this because you weren't in my life, not in spite of it. That landed hard. Brett flinched. Right. Of course. Julian appeared at Simone's elbow. Everything okay here? Fine. Brett was just leaving. Brett looked at Julian, taking in his expensive coat and confident posture and the easy way he stood next to Simone. Is this your new boyfriend? That's none of your business. Of course it's not. Nothing about your life is my business anymore. Brett turned to walk away, then stopped. For what it's worth, I hope you're happy. I hope this all works out for you. I hope you find someone who appreciates what they have. I already have what I need, Simone said. I don't need someone to complete me. I'm not a half looking for another half. I'm whole all by myself. After Brett left, Julian didn't ask questions. He just handed her a cup of coffee from the food truck across the street and returned to discussing the timeline for opening. That evening, Simone worked her usual shift at Heritage. The restaurant was busy, every table full, the energy buzzing with satisfaction. She moved through her sections with practiced ease, present in each moment, focused on the work. Near the end of service, a family celebrating a birthday asked her to take their photo. She did, making sure everyone was in frame, that the lighting was good. The grandmother pulled her aside afterward. Thank you for making tonight special. You're wonderful at what you do. Thank you. That means a lot. Can I ask you something? Why do you do this? You're the owner, aren't you? I saw the article. Simone smiled. I am the owner. And I do this because it matters. Because every job has dignity. Because I never want to forget what it feels like to serve people, to work hard, to earn respect through effort. The grandmother nodded. My husband thought I was silly for working after our kids were grown. Said I didn't need the money. But it wasn't about money. It was about purpose. Exactly. You're a smart woman. Don't let anyone make you forget your worth. After they left, Simone thought about Brett's visit. His apology had been real, she believed that. But real apologies didn't erase consequences. They just acknowledged the harm that had been done. Brett was sorry. Good. That meant he'd learned something. That meant maybe he'd make better choices going forward. Maybe he'd treat the next person better. Maybe he'd understand that relationships required respect and effort and honesty. But none of that had anything to do with Simone anymore. She'd spent 2 years building something real. She'd worked every job in her restaurant. She'd made smart decisions and taken calculated risks. She'd helped people along the way, creating opportunities for others while creating success for herself. Brett's apology didn't diminish that. His consequences didn't increase her victory. They existed in parallel, two separate stories that had once intersected but no longer did. She was ready to close that chapter completely. Later that night, after Heritage closed and the staff went home, Simone sat in her office with Thomas and Nicole. They reviewed numbers, discussed menu changes for winter, planned the hiring timeline for Legacy. We're going to need to find someone to replace you at Heritage, Thomas said. When Legacy opens, you won't be able to work floor shifts at both locations. I know. Are you okay with that? Giving up serving? Simone thought about it. The past 2 years had been transformative. Working every position had taught her everything she needed to know about running a restaurant. It had kept her humble, kept her focused, kept her connected to the reality of the business. But Thomas was right. It was time to step into the next phase. Time to be the owner in full, not the owner in disguise. I'll still work shifts occasionally, she said. But yes, I'm ready to step back. I've learned what I needed to learn. What did you learn? Nicole asked. That success isn't about the title. It's about the work. It's about showing up every day and doing your best. It's about treating people with respect regardless of their position. Simone smiled. And I learned that I'm stronger than I ever knew. That I can build something real. That I don't need anyone's approval or validation to know my worth. That's beautiful, Thomas said. Also, can we put it on a plaque somewhere? They all laughed, the tension breaking. But Simone meant every word. She'd learned those lessons through fire, through pain, through hard work and determination. They weren't just words. They were truth, earned and embodied. As she drove home that night, Simone thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago. Married to Brett, living in his shadow, believing his narrative that she wasn't enough. That woman seemed like a stranger now. The woman she was now knew her worth. She'd proven it to herself in the most fundamental way possible. Through action, through achievement, through persistence. Brett's apology was nice. But it wasn't necessary. She'd already forgiven herself for ever believing his lies. And that was the only forgiveness that mattered. Legacy opened on a bright Saturday morning in March. The line stretched around the block before they even unlocked the doors. People clutching the opening day vouchers Simone had distributed through local community centers. Food bloggers with cameras. Curious neighbors. Loyal customers from Heritage who wanted to support the expansion. Simone stood at the host stand, dressed in the same black pants and white shirt she'd worn as a server, and welcomed each person personally. Thomas managed the dining room at Heritage while she ran Legacy's first service. Nicole had trained a new head chef for Legacy, a talented young woman named Carmen who'd worked her way up from the line at Heritage. The morning was controlled chaos. Orders backed up in the kitchen. A table's food came out wrong. The espresso machine had issues. Every small crisis that could happen on an opening day did. But Simone moved through it all with calm confidence. She'd planned for problems. She'd prepared her team. They knew what to do because she'd taught them, because she'd worked every position herself and understood the challenges. By noon the rhythm had smoothed out. Customers raved about the food. The brunch menu was a hit, especially the shrimp and grits with poached eggs that Carmen had developed. The space itself was beautiful, light-filled and modern while maintaining the warm, welcoming feeling of Heritage. Julian stopped by during the lunch rush, bringing his daughters. Simone seated them at a choice table by the window and sent over complimentary orange juice for the girls. "It's perfect," he told her. "Everything we planned brought to life. Thank you for the beautiful design. Thank you for trusting me with your vision." He paused. "My ex-wife is picking up the girls in an hour. Would you want to grab coffee after? To celebrate?" Simone looked at him, really looked at him. He was kind. He was talented. He respected her work and her independence. He had his own life, his own priorities, his own wholeness. He wasn't looking for someone to complete him or fix him or validate him. "I'd like that," she said. By the time evening came, Legacy had served over 200 people. Every table had been full all day. The staff was exhausted but exhilarated. Carmen high-fived her line cooks. The servers compared their tip tallies with delight. Everyone agreed it had been a successful launch. Simone locked the doors at 9 p.m. and stood in the quiet dining room, looking around at what she'd created. 2 restaurants. 43 employees at Heritage, 32 at Legacy. 75 families depending on the businesses she'd built. Scholarship funds helping students pursue their dreams. Quality food and service making people's lives a little better every day. She thought about the woman who'd walked into this same city 2 years ago with a small settlement check and a trust fund and a dream that seemed impossible. She thought about working as a server while her ex-husband mocked her. She thought about every doubt, every fear, every moment when she'd wondered if she was crazy for trying. All of it had led here. To this moment. To this success. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Saw the line at Legacy on social media. "Congratulations. You're amazing." More messages followed. Old friends. Former neighbors. People from her past who'd witnessed different versions of her journey. They were proud. They were impressed. They were inspired. But the message that meant the most came from Helen, Brett's mother. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you. I'm too. You've created something beautiful. Love, Helen." Simone sat in the quiet restaurant and allowed herself to feel it. Pride, joy, satisfaction. She'd earned this. Every bit of it. Through work and risk and determination and refusing to let anyone define her worth for her. Brett was somewhere living in his mother's basement, dealing with the consequences of his choices. Amber had moved on to a new relationship with someone who valued her. Julian was taking his daughters to a movie, being a present father. Thomas was closing Heritage, preparing for another day of service tomorrow. Nicole was probably in her kitchen at home, testing new recipes because that's what she loved to do. Everyone was living their lives, making their choices, creating their stories. And Simone's story was one of triumph. Not over Brett specifically. Over doubt. Over fear. Over the lie that her worth was determined by someone else's perception. She'd proven that she could build something real. That she could succeed on her own terms. That the best revenge wasn't hurting the person who hurt you. It was building a life so good, so full, so meaningful that their absence became a gift rather than a loss. 3 months later, a regional business magazine did a feature on successful women entrepreneurs. Simone was on the cover, standing between Heritage and Legacy, smiling confidently at the camera. The article detailed her journey from divorce to business ownership, from secret server to celebrated restaurateur. The journalist asked her what advice she'd give to other women starting over after loss or betrayal. Remember that someone else's poor treatment of you says nothing about your value and everything about their character, Simone said. And remember that the best way to prove yourself is to yourself. Build something you're proud of. Do work that matters. Treat people with respect. Success will follow. What about forgiveness? The journalist asked. Do you think you need to forgive people who've hurt you? Simone thought about it carefully. I think forgiveness is personal and individual. Some people need it to move on. But I think what's more important than forgiving others is forgiving yourself. For staying too long. For believing lies. For not seeing what was right in front of you. Once you forgive yourself, other people's actions lose their power over you. And have you? Forgiven yourself? Yes. That's how I knew I was ready to truly succeed. The article went viral, shared thousands of times by women who saw themselves in Simone's story. She received emails and messages from people she'd never met, thanking her for her honesty, asking for advice, sharing their own journeys of rebuilding. She answered what she could, offered encouragement where it mattered, and continued doing her work. Heritage celebrated its 3rd anniversary. Legacy was thriving. Simone had started looking at properties for a 3rd location. The scholarship fund had helped 6 students so far. Her staff was happy, well-paid, and loyal. And one evening, sitting at a quiet dinner with Julian at a restaurant that wasn't one of hers, Simone realized she was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. Not because everything was perfect, but because she built a life that felt true to who she was. Julian reached across the table and took her hand. What are you thinking about? How strange life is. How the worst thing that ever happened to me led directly to the best thing I ever built. Your restaurants. My whole life. This version of me. The one who knows her worth. The one who doesn't need validation from anyone else. The one who can build something from nothing and trust herself completely. She squeezed his hand. I wouldn't have become this person if I'd stayed in that marriage. So you're grateful for the divorce? I'm grateful for what I learned from it. I'm grateful for who I became because of it. She smiled. And I'm grateful that I'm sitting here with someone who sees me as an equal, not a project or a trophy or a support system for their ego. You're definitely not any of those things. Julian smiled back. You're magnificent, driven, independent, occasionally intimidating. Intimidating? In the best way. You know what you want and you make it happen. That's attractive and a little scary. They laughed and Simone felt light, free, full of possibility. Her restaurants would continue growing. Her team would continue thriving. Her life would continue evolving. And somewhere in the city, Brett was living his own story. Maybe he was learning from his mistakes. Maybe he was becoming a better person. Maybe he was finally understanding the difference between image and substance. But that wasn't Simone's concern anymore. She'd closed that chapter. She'd written a new story, one where she was the hero, the builder, the architect of her own success. The waiter came to clear their plates, a young man working his way through school. Simone thanked him warmly, tipped generously, treated him with the respect she knew the job deserved. Julian noticed. You really do see everyone as equals, don't you? Because everyone is equal. We just do different work. She finished her wine. That's the lesson I learned serving tables. There's no such thing as a lesser job, only a lesser understanding of what makes society function. That's beautiful. Also very philosophical for a Saturday night. Would you prefer small talk? Never. I prefer exactly this. You being you, completely unfiltered and brilliant. Simone smiled, feeling the warmth of being truly seen. Not as someone's ex-wife or as a woman rebuilding after betrayal, but as herself. Complete, successful, whole. The mocked ex-wife serving tables had become the restaurant empire owner. The woman dismissed as a failure had become an inspiration. The person told she contributed nothing had created something that contributed to dozens of lives. That was the real story. That was the triumph. And it was only the beginning.